Hi guys, my name's Alex, and today I want to talk to you about how everything in the world is made by man, or at least touched by man. And we can't see it because we're like, oh, well, there's tons of other animals. We live on like less than 1% of the Earth's crust, as Hank Green said. Um, there's so much of the Earth that is not made of humans. But humans are very unique, and this might give us all some insight as to why it's so important that we are kind of the mass extinction, right? Because there have been other times where the world has drastically changed. There have been a whole bunch of new species that show up, but none of them has affected Earth like humans have. Not even a whole group of them. Because every species prior to now bends to its environment in some way. We directly impact our environment very quickly and very immediately. And you can think of even like monkeys that have some tool usage, or some animals that have simple tool usage, right? They're able to affect the environment by, say, breaking a coconut open with a rock, right? But they're not breaking 1,000 coconuts open. If you gave them a couple million years, they would not get to the point where they have something that breaks coconuts open for them, and then they're able to eat off of that. And then they're producing more food than they need, and then it goes to waste, and you have this whole economy breakdown. I think that says something about our economic foray, which is that our economy has become closed-minded by becoming bigger. And that's a bold statement. And part of it is just my thoughts on, like, what does a small economy look like versus a large economy? And this is also a way in which humans have touched everything, right? We've given everything a value. And if you look back to some Native American tribes, one of the beliefs is like land cannot be owned. And therefore you can't put a value on land. It is a thing that exists independently. In the same way that if you, which I hope you do, believe that slavery is not just, then you believe that you can't put a value on a human. And this is a thing that, despite that, insurance companies have done. Doctors have done. Regardless of how much the cancer treatment costs, you are also saying this is the cost of your survival. And that's important for us to recognize, because if you go down to a more localized economy, say you've got an economy of 49 people, which is the number of people that live in, I forgot which small city in Afghanistan. So it exists, a place with just 49 people in it, and they are able to probably till their own land. They have some way of communicating with each other. And then beyond that, as long as they are eating food from either local land or from local animals, there's not much more that you can need. But once you start enlarging your economy, somehow, despite the fact that we have more resources than we need, we're starting to waste them, and therefore we run out. And you can think of this as like produce, right? Fruits. There are many more fruits that grow than actually wind up in grocery stores. And then of the ones that wind up in grocery stores, a lot of them don't get sold. And then of the ones that do get sold, a lot of them rot in our fridges. Like, there is a progressive amount of waste at every step. And that's not surprising, because it is hard to make a machine that does everything, let alone a human that does everything. You want to eat every part of the animal? That might take months, because it's hard to find a use for a chicken gizzard. It's like mostly made of rocks, as far as I understand. Um, but it's just like there's so many moving parts to this that you eventually have to make simplifications where simplifications don't really make sense. As an example of this, although complicated, we can talk about language, right? We're like, oh, languages all work the same way, right? We all have this understanding of nouns, of past, present, future, of maybe within the past tense, something that happened and was completed versus something that happened and is still happening, or something that precedes another event. So there's so many different breakdowns within a language. And then we might assume, oh, well, words have a certain way that they work, so they have to come in a certain order. But say you speak a different language, right? Like Korean's verb order is different than English's word order. And all of a sudden, you have this breakdown where you can no longer assume that two things that should seem very obvious are no longer true. And that then becomes true for planet Earth. Because if you look at say even the most remote places on Earth, they are affected by the wind, right? Sand dunes form from wind moving over them. Wind is created by air currents, which is created by heat, and heat is changed when you undergo something like global warming. And global warming comes from the types of emissions that we produce. And this, you want an example of this? Why don't we take the fact that in Florida, which is where I live, a few summers ago, we had a bunch of beautiful sunsets that were caused by Saharan dust, as in dust that came from the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. But it affects us. It gets caught up in the wind and it comes to the other side. You have typhoons and like hurricane type events that start on one side of the Pacific Ocean and literally travel all the way across it. You know, when you have an earthquake on, say, any part of a fault line, it travels a good distance up the fault line. It's not like it just breaks in one part. You have like two plates moving apart. And it's so necessary to see that every little action ripples everywhere. And I did talk about this in the previous video, but I think it's important to see how humans fit into this, because if we're going to understand society, which I think is very important if we're all going to be a part of it, then we need to have some concept of how it works so that we can act on it. And I'm talking to some people who don't care about society, we'll say, or about politics, which is, I think, the way a lot of us view society, is like beyond our local economy, beyond what we spend and who we talk to and what we like to eat. Things start to get very nebulous. They start to not matter. Because, like, okay, well, why would I care what's happening to some kid in, say, Sri Lanka? Well, you would care because they're a human, and then because their economic collapse is foretelling for what happens in other places in the world under similar circumstances. You know, look at Russia, right? It's like we've seen how invasions work before. We kind of know how this is going to play out. So we can use history from other countries, say during World War II, or even Russia's own actions during World War II, to tell you how they might act now. And, you know, and so history, which is recorded by humans about humans and human actions, is something that easily predicts a story for how the future is going to go. So if the future is dependent on the past and the past is dependent on human actions, then the future is dependent on human actions. And if one action ripples out in every direction, then you can assume, well, roughly assume, there's a poor mathematical proof, that if you have a human act in one place, that in the future, when that has had the time to ripple out, everywhere in the world is affected by a single event created by a single human. And it's the whole idea of the butterfly effect, right? A butterfly flaps its wings in Tokyo, and tomorrow in London, there's a thunderstorm that wouldn't have been there otherwise. And this is a little bit of an overstatement because, well, that butterfly couldn't have just like not existed or decided not to flap its wings. Like, it's going to flap its wings at a different time if it doesn't do it then. The butterfly doesn't just cease to exist. All the matter that it's made up of goes somewhere else. And this goes back to humanity because we're manipulating all of that. In order for us to make decisions, we have to manipulate matter. We have to either have neurological pathways that send electricity in some direction, or we have to have something that acts on us and then we accidentally affect it, right? Like, say a gust of wind, and wind is just a great example because it happens both locally and all over the world. But say a gust of wind blows some sand into your eyes. Now, if you weren't there, the sand would just blow and then probably hit the ground somewhere else. But because it got in your eyes, you might bump into somebody and that, like, cause a bike to drift into an oncoming traffic lane and then cause a car pileup, which is sad. But the point is that these events escalate very quickly. And in the same way, you can have like a little bit of heat that creates an air current, and that air current happens to be turbulent, and that affects a plane. And then, and then the plane comes down because these are all extreme examples. But the point is that it's easy to illustrate how any little thing can affect everything else. So if we want more examples, let's go back in time to early humans, say the last ice age, roughly 10,000 years ago. Like, hunting woolly mammoths to extinction. And then, like, that greatly affects the food chain. It affects every type of wildlife that exists here, or like it exists in a place, and then that travels overseas. And so, for example, we had no large megafauna, but that is what mega means, but we had no large animals left in the Americas after humans either led most of them to extinction or they died of their own causes. Which is why when we started to see like large teeth when they were excavating in the 1800s for fossils, they thought, oh, these must be related to modern animals because there's no way they would have gotten here in the past. There weren't these animals here, and also they didn't understand how dinosaurs worked. Um, but the animals that they were referring to didn't come over to the Americas until after 1500. So you have this huge disconnect. And it's like, well, these little things like hunting for your next meal, but hunting as a society, and then a society that's like, oh, we need more food so that when some of it rots, we still have enough to survive, and that maybe we stockpile for winter, we start looking ahead, which is, just like hibernation. You plan, you stash food, but there's rippling consequences that are unforeseen. And so this just goes everywhere. And the other half of it is, to me, what I see through the eyes of an engineer, right? Every single thing that you see and interact with that is like built in any way, say a house, say your lawn, say, I don't know, the Legos that are around me or the paper that I use. Those were all not only made by humans, but made by machines that were designed by humans. And those humans that designed the machines were taught by humans. And there was a whole process that led up to the invention of that machine, that process, and this device that you're using. And then you have to think like every one of those people ate food, and that food was produced by a person. They're spending money on these items that was made and invented as a concept by a person. Like there is no quantity of things that we can define that is not made by humans. And I mean, this goes on virtually forever, because even those blades of grass I was talking about, right? Like someone designed that landscaping, someone like physically planted that grass per se, or maybe they didn't. Maybe they erected a park half a mile away, and that park created speciation because now, or like a highway is a better example. That grass that was previously just a huge field, and when one part of the grass changed, all the grass changed. Well, now there's a highway in the middle, so the seeds from that grass can't blow. The animals can't cross without becoming roadkill. So now you have two different versions of this animal, literally separated only because cars need to pass on a daily basis. And I mean, you can literally see it. I remember like driving down from school in Gainesville, which is like roughly 6 hours from where I live, and being able to see that literally as you go down, the trees on one side look different from the trees on the other. And not only that, but you see this like statistical gradient. So you have these huge populations of trees in one place, of like one type, and then they start to break down the further you go, and then you start seeing another type of species rise up. And that population dynamic is really important because it also talks about how humans move. And so like when we move to places, we affect the food, we affect the culture. Think about every war that's ever happened. When soldiers go to places, they bring their language. Some of the locals pick up on that language. Some of the locals start to try the food, and the soldiers start to try the food of the locals, and they might bring some of those dishes back and realize that they like them. They might rob a museum of artwork, and then suddenly that stolen artwork becomes inspiration for an entire artistic movement in a place. So, I mean, a lot of these things that I've described are terrible. And to be honest, it's kind of how I see the world a little bit, is that there are a lot of things that by moving them in horrible ways, we create a ripple that's so vast and so affecting of humanity that we literally lose sight of how it happened, right? Like another horrible but good example of how this works is like race in America, right? The idea of what races are even made up in America comes from different sets of migrations to the Americas. And so even the types of people that you see are the effect of human actions, not just accidental things of, oh, I happen to be on this boat and show up. It's like, no, racial profiling is a thing because we have a history of a racial divide, and that racial divide comes from slavery, from literally importing people. And prior to that, through making deals with people to say, oh, this is an enemy of our tribe or of our country, and therefore we under our own legal system find it okay to have them as economic slaves, and then as inferior slaves based on the way we view the way they think or the culture that they have. And this breaks down in literally every way, right? But with the speciation example, it shows how even the animals that we see around us are the product of human breeding, whether or not we've made them directly, or if it's just the product of the things we've put in the ways of these animals and then their populations explode in a certain way. Or you can think of dog breeds where we've deliberately changed them, or bananas, right? There's different types of bananas in different parts of the world, but almost all of them have been replaced with the type of banana that we're used to seeing in the supermarket because it was optimized for like for better output, having smaller seeds, being more edible, being sweeter. And these are things that happen to most things that we eat. And some of that doesn't even count as genetic modification because we're just like, oh, we're gonna plant the same banana. Like, say we have 100 bananas. Every time the banana trees plants blossom, I don't totally know how bananas work. But you take the sweetest one from that batch and then you plant it in the ground, the seeds in the ground, and then you take the sweetest one from that batch and you plant just that one and you grow 100 from it. And eventually you've made the sweetest banana without crossbreeding anything. And that just goes to show, right? Like, no matter how many labels you put on something, no matter how environmentally friendly something is, right? Unfortunately, say a company is environmentally friendly, well, they still produce trash. That trash is still either put in a landfill or sold to someone. Like an environmental law firm is not faultless. They're still fighting, more like everyone is morally ambiguous to some degree. And their clients may still produce trash, or their clients will definitely produce trash. Like, you can't get far enough away from the label of environmentally friendly or sustainably produced or like produced ethically, because so long as there are still these issues on the planet of underpaid labor, of people starving, of environmental issues, and so many more of undereducated people and so on, you can't outrun the fact that there's always someone in the process who is not abiding by that. And it speaks to the fact that we need change, that there are this many problems that still exist. It also speaks to the fact of how accessible it is. Because if we can affect literally everything on Earth, anything you've ever seen was designed by a human or affected by something that was designed by a human, it's very changeable. Because we managed to change it into what it is today, we can change it into what it needs to be in the future. And I will spend so much time on this channel talking about how things are related and what we can do and how we should care, because this is our society. Yeah, it might have been made by someone, but we were born into it and we have no choice but to live in it or die in it. And if we want our lives to be not miserable or even happy, God forbid, then we've got to do something about it. We have to care. And, sometimes it sounds stupid when people say, go vote. I don't care who you vote for. But it's like, you have to affect the decisions that are happening on planet Earth, or they're going to pass you right by. To not care about politics, no matter how stupid it gets from time to time, means that the laws that get passed directly affect you, but you didn't get to have a say in them. And that's why people care about independence. I mean, that's why it's considered like a civil service or a right and a freedom to be able to vote, regardless of how messed up a political system is. So this has gone in so many different directions, and I kind of hope that it would, because it should illustrate to you how different parts of society are all completely interwoven, and how the thing right in the middle of that weaving and the thing doing the weaving is humanity, and that we are the thread and that we are the needle. There's no part that goes untouched. And so we can use this as a building block for where we want to go. So I hope that this video, and maybe hopefully the other videos on the channel, if you like it, like, subscribe, stick around, but check out some of the other stuff I'm saying, because I want us to all have some idea of where we come from and where we're going and why we should care, because it's fascinating. I mean, the world around us is so unbelievably complex and yet simultaneously full of so many good and simple stories. And if we can break that down, if we can imbue ourselves with that knowledge, we'll be all the better for it, because we can actually do things with the stuff around us. So I'll stop rambling, but thank you guys for watching, and let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Of course, have a good one.